so I'll do a little vamping here as we're going. I want to welcome everyone to part one of our Journey to a Smart Water Infrastructure panel discussion series. It's going to be a little different than our normal webinars we do. It's not just going to be a bunch of slides. We're going to have a great panel of speakers. They're going to talk to you about this subject, and we look forward to your questions as we go. We're still letting a few people in here, and it looks like we have the majority, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So it's a little bit of housekeeping. Depending on the app you're using or how you're using Teams or how it's working for you, you should have a Q&A button somewhere on your screen. Allison is going to just type a little note in the Q&A, just let you know so you can see that it pops up where it is. And if you have a question, type it in there as we're talking, and we'll monitor those. The speakers will monitor them, and we'll answer them as we can. If we think it's something that needs to wait until after the meeting, or maybe we just can't get to it because of time, we'll make every effort to get with you after the call. In the next couple of days, maybe send it to your one of us will answer, or we'll send it to your local rep to handle the question. Now, if you do not have a Q&A button on your device, as for example, my phone wouldn't show that, you can use our chat feature, and the chat feature is on everything. So you can go in there and type your question, but we will be monitoring the Q&A section as a priority, but you still have a chance. And if all that doesn't work for you, please feel free to email us on the email where you got this, and we'll get to it. Sorry, let me introduce who is with us today. Well, I'm your host today. I'm Todd Reed, and I also produce and host our webinars. We have a couple a month that's usually focused on thought leadership, usually with our manufacturers, and we work to bring you quality products, services, and content through them. I'm also the host of our new podcast, Keepin the Lights On, and you can find that on all your favorite podcast apps and platforms. And we talk to people from all markets, all areas, customers, contractors, end users, sales reps, manufacturers, thought leaders, just trying to bring you a short 30-minute glimpse into all the worlds that we work in. With us today, our speakers are Hal Chassero. He's our Director of Industrial Sales in the Southeast at Graybar Electric. He has 32 years of service with Graybar, serving in various roles, starting in the warehouse, counter, sales, and management. And he has a passion for Graybar's automation and control sales efforts. We have John Tice. He is an automation business development manager with Graybar, located in Orlando. He received his BS in engineering technology at UCF and has a certified Schneider Electric VFD startup technician with nearly 30 years of experience with drives and controls. He is a key innovator in the Florida wastewater market. And lastly, we have James Westerfield. He is our Director of Industrial Sales at Graybar in Southern California. He has over 20 years experience in working with wastewater customers in Southern California, spec engineers, integrators, and working within the control, electrical, and instrumentation industry. So I don't have to tell you that municipalities are faced with many challenges as they plan for the future of their wastewater facilities. Aging infrastructure, technology advancements, data management, cybersecurity, automation are all just a small list of the concerns facing operators. So we created a 3-part series of panel discussions that's going to present insights and best practices and ideas on how to get started on creating a smarter water infrastructure. So speakers are going to include people from distribution like today. We're also going to have engineering, integrators, and manufacturers. I'll give a little bit more information on that on our second part 2 at the end of the presentation today. And today's really about setting the stage. This part 1 is we're going to start setting the stage by looking at the major issues facing water or wastewater facilities. And, and these are going to be the questions that we're going to work through with these gentlemen today. Kind of what's the challenge? And again, looking at all these from the aspect of smarter, industrial automation and how that's going to play a role in solving these. So what are the challenges? Why should we look at automation differently in this area? What are advancements that they're seeing in industrial control solutions? And what are other issues we need to really think about as we talk about this topic? And then really, why spend the money? So let's move away from me and quit that introduction. Let's get to the real people here that we care about. And that's our Hal, Jim, and John. So let's start out the real basic. Let's highlight of what's happening in the industry. Kind of what are some of the problems that you're all seeing, and we hear about, as I've been learning about this, is a lot about obsolescence, all of our infrastructure, not just water, wastewater. So there's a few questions to consider there. And Hal, I'll just start with you, and then you, Jim and John, jump in when you want.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the obsolescence, what a challenge that is. You've got various manufacturers that mature their products, trying to keep up with that, trying to keep up with all the standardizations and the things happening outright within the government requirements, and just trying to keep up with obsolescence and old equipment is becoming more and more of a challenge for the simple reason that how do you go about looking at that obsolescence? How do you come up with a strategic plan to deal with the obsolescence? Because quite honestly, if you're a facility that has 20, 30, 40 processors, let's just say on your floor, you can't go in and rip them all out at one time, right? That's just not economically feasible, uh, both in the number of people you have and the amount of money you'd have to spend for the equipment. So I think that's a challenge that many of the municipalities are facing today, and with some good partners out there with their strategic integrators that they may work with, I think that's something that you've got to come up with a strategic plan, right? Not a rip and replace, but maybe you look at, hey, if I've got 30, 40 processors, do I use one replacement and create my own spares? Do I look at the amount of I/O out there that I've heard many integrators talk about? If it's a certain amount of I/O, maybe I look at that one first. If I add more than 2 points of I/O, or if my rack's full or going to be full, if I add more than 2 or 3 points of I/O, what do I replace that? And then create my own spares and move on to the other piece. Because at the end of the day, you want to replace the obsolescent items, but you've got to do it in a smart way that's most cost effective and cost efficient for you. And so there's got to be a strategy around that. And I think it's both the whomever the distributor you work with or the system integrator's role to help the end user come up with a plan, a logical plan that's going to keep them running, get them up to speed, and know that it's going to take a little while probably to get that to overcome that obsolescence.
Great. Jim or John, anything to add to that?
So what I see is we've got some of our infrastructures at least a half a century old. Mm-hmm. So, in and itself, that causes several problems. There's leaks in the piping to and from everything. If you look here recently, the energy cost is just skyrocketing right now. So they need to go ahead and make sure they monitor and product that. A big thing we're coming down here is product obsolescence. Some of these plants have been running and hasn't updates equipment in decades. So there's a lot of product obsolescence. And the last one, these plants have been around a while, the water quality. They need to upgrade, make sure those are up to the latest standards.
I think Hal and John, to emphasize what they're talking about, how I got to the immediate. I have obsolescence stuff. I got to keep the plant running. I got to produce water. And John also hit the other key drivers. We got a lot of plants out there that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, what have you. The things that were important in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, public safety, do I have enough capacity? Is it maintainable? Did my project come in on time, on budget? All those things are still as important today as they've ever been. Water quality, all those things. But public policy is changing. So what I'm starting to see is, or starting to be discussed is, hey, it's not enough just to do it like it was. And a good example here, again, I am in California, is, we are looking very hard at alternative energy, green energy. We're looking very hard at moving away from cars that run on gasoline. We want to go to electric. Well, guess what? That's going to really increase the amount of the electrical grid's just not ready for that. I'll put it that way, either from a distribution standpoint or from a production capacity standpoint. Well, if you're the public policymaker who's saying, hey, I want to go down this road because of green energy, guess what? one of the first things you're going to look at is, what am I doing in my own house as a public agency, as a city, in order to cut back on my loads? And one of the most significant loads in most cities is their water utility. So how do we produce the same amount of quality, safe water or processed wastewater and do it more efficiently, right? That's going to be a driver. This is kind of future stuff. I think it's being discussed. I don't know anybody who's designing around it yet. The other thing we're running into is, remarkably enough, that some of the utilities, particularly those utilities are both joint water and, say, electrical, because of solar roofs and things that are going on with homes, they're actually seeing the revenue stream decrease. As we get more efficient about how we use water, like, hey, again, it's a California thing, but we don't want you to water you can only water your lawn on Tuesday and Thursday. We're reducing demand. Well, guess what? That's less revenue for the water company. So how do I, as a water company, get the same amount of work done, increase my capacity, service more people, and have less money to do it? That's very real where I live. And I would offer up that the only way you're going to get there is you're going to have to be more, we're going to have to do some things differently. We're going to have to do them more intelligently. And that's kind of one of the reasons I think that this is an important conversation.
Right. Yeah, that's some good insight. Yeah, that's so one of the things that we talked about before was maybe the inability because a lot of people are upgrading, right? They're not building a brand new platform necessarily. You're going to have a mix of products, and maybe it's an inability to standardize on one manufacturer. Can maybe one of you guys touch on that and how that's challenging how we're moving forward? Anybody?
Sure.
John?
I'll hit just one aspect of that. Water quality. So, I cover the entire state, and I see inconsistencies from county to county, city to city on that. But just thinking, in the last couple of years, we were introduced to coronavirus, and there's other contaminants that were released into the systems. So to be able to monitor that real time, see where they're at, and be able to act on that, that is a big thing right now.
Okay. Any additional thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, you talk about standardization. The thought of what a standardized system has changed in the 25 years I've been working in the water industry. When I started, standardization meant that we're going to all choose the same software platform. Back then it was the war between Windows NT and Windows, whatever, 95 or whatever the heck it was back in the day, right? And then it was, what does standardization mean? I'm not sure that that's a stagnant conversation. I think that continues to evolve. What I'm seeing increasingly is standardization has to do, first of all, there is goodness in minimizing the number of different components you have to inventory and the number of systems you have to train on, clearly. And it's an operations, it's a maintenance thing. But when you start looking at standardization now, standardization increasingly has become data manipulation. How do I have standardized data sets? How do I have a standardized architecture that I can add to as my needs change to make sure that I can access the information I need so my operations team can make the right decisions, so that my maintenance team can maintain it, right? Because it's not obsolete. All goes back to what Hal talked about. That's where I'm at with standardization. When you talk about standardization, what do you mean? It's not as simple as, if I just buy the same processor and put it everywhere, I'm standardized. Well, not anymore. Because what if you're trying to put in some kind of field device that communicates over a 5G network in order to bring data in that you're trying to integrate into your control scheme for leak detection, which is what John talked about, right? It's standard. There may not be a processor out there. It may be something else. What does standardization mean? That's kind of where I'm at with standardization right now.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Jim, when you talk standardization, I would add on top of that something that allows me to grow, because you touched on the topic that what was relevant, 10, 15, 20 years ago is not as it's relevant today, but in a different scheme, right? I have to have the ability to adapt and to grow into this, because we cannot continue to go back. If we're not standardized, I can't continue to go back to take this piece out, add a piece such that I can handle some other new regulation or need of data or what have you. So I think within that standardization too, there's got to be the underlying factor of I've got to have the ability to grow and evolve with what is happening in my community. Bigger influx of people, bigger influx of industry, or even people leaving or industry leaving my area.
Right. I think that starts to really get into, you can see why this is a complex subject, and one reason we wanted to have this series. So the kind of one of the last things we talked about in our kind of prepping for this session was, and I can touch on this, is the aging workforce, and that is not exclusive to water, wastewater. I spend a lot of time with our contractor customers. Same problem. Almost anyone we talk to is the same. It's aging workforce and fewer people coming into the business. You kind of touched on that just right now, Hal, but so, the reason that's a challenge, obviously, is you're losing a lot of industry knowledge, and you have fewer people to do the work that needs to be done, not only in your facility, as an operator, but the contractors that serve your facility also have fewer people. So there's just, what can we do to lessen that? I think that's one thing we're going to cover in the next few questions and the next few parts of these moving forward, is how can automation help you do at a minimum the same, but probably more with less bodies, just because they may not be there to do the work. Let's move on to the next subject. So, and you guys have kind of touched on some of these, but why do people in water, wastewater need to look at automation differently than maybe they have in the past, and in the past like 20 years or something when automations come in? So one of the subjects we talked about were the influx of data. So I think, John, I'm going to start with you on that one. Do you have and what you're thinking on that?
So the data, like I said, some of these places are 50 years old. So if you look at today, every pipe, valve, storage tank is information. So we need to gather that information, bring it back to a centralized location. So that's where SCADA comes in to take. What SCADA can do is actually automatically adjust water levels, chemical feeds, other stuff. So before everything was manually, now we can actually see it automated, real time, be able to react faster on this.
Here's an example. I think you spend a lot of time around this, and you have these moments where the light bulb goes off. This was my light bulb when I was in a small, mid-sized community on the Central Coast in California one day, and they had leak problems, what John was talking about. And we went and I looked at the SCADA systems, and operationally, they knew what they were pumping out of the plant. But once it left the plant, they really lost resolution of what was going on with water flows, the types of information you need to figure out if I had a leak or where the leak was. Well, it just so happened, it wasn't planned, that I was also having a conversation with somebody else at the plant who worked on the business side. And lo and behold, they had an initiative to put in smart metering at all the homes. And part of that smart metering was real-time consumption data. And then the light bulb went off. So wait a minute, your operations guys, your water plant knows what they put into the pipe, and your billing people knows what came out of the pipe and where it came out of the pipe. Somewhere in there are the beginnings of the elements to figure out if you have a leak, not just how much you're leaking, but I won't say it'll identify where the leak is, but it gives you a compass and a map of where to go look. And so I brought this conversation up, and I literally watched the operations manager. I saw his light bulb go off, and he goes, I hadn't thought about that. And then I watched him go through the process of understanding, because they have two different sets of data operated by two different business elements within the organization. How do you bring that together? And they've been talking about it. They haven't done it yet, but it's a conversation. And I think there are a lot more opportunities like that in the water, wastewater market that might give us opportunities to drive out those efficiencies and capabilities in the future, but it's all data driven.
But I think, Jim, when you talk about the data, it's interesting. We do talk about this, and we talk about all the data that's out there, but there are several infrastructures that are sitting out there that really don't have the ability to give us the data that we need, right? And so as you go around and you talk to some of these end users and system integrators that are in the field looking at this, if we don't have the basics down and the basic infrastructure down and the ability to pull that data or the right data, then we can't really get to where we want to be. We can put in all these structures, these controls, we can use all the software we want, but if we can't get the data points we need, that's a problem. And I was talking to a gentleman one day, and he says he wants to use the data to empower people with it in order that they can make not accurate decisions, but real-time accurate decisions, right? And I think that's the important piece there, the real-time accurate decisions versus the old days where you drive around in a truck to go get the data. By the time you got the data, the data is accurate, but it's no longer real time, and we can't react to that where we're going. And I think this conversation begets or connects with some of the standardization talk we had, and also the aging infrastructure, right? With the data information and with the abilities of some software platforms out there from multiple people, we now have the ability to get the data, to understand what it means to be able to train people, maybe be able to get procedures and policies in place so that when the gentleman or lady leaves with 30 years of experience, I now have the ability to bring the newer people in and get them up to speed more quickly if my data is correct and accurate. So,
and to Hal's point too, John's probably can really speak to this. The skill sets of the people coming out of school right now are very different. When I look at what is called an instrumentation guy right now, a lot of times they don't look like what I got taught in school, right? You know, I was dealing with 8-bit structures and baud rates, right? They're talking about IP address. I mean, it's a different world right now. I think the other exciting thing, and yeah, the compression of the workforce is very real. How do we do more with less? But it's also exciting because where we've come from in technology, as Hal was talking about standardization, we're bringing people in now with new skill sets, new ways of looking at the problem that isn't, well, I've got, so much, 32K baud, right? Woohoo, I got all the data bandwidth I need. Now you got these younger people coming in and they have a new approach to the problem. They have a new way of looking at the problem, and they're creating new standards. They're creating new ways of looking at the business. And that's all very different than the plant that was built in 1950. The way they're approaching that looks and feels different, and the way they want to handle that is different. And it creates an opportunity for, I think, the wastewater market to find new efficiencies and new ways of doing business.
And, Hal or John, any other comments kind of about, having to do more with less in terms of workforce and how we should look at automation differently because of that issue? Any comments on that?
I think that when you look at that, and especially doing more with less, we really want to get from the ability to react to the ability to predict, right? Okay. That makes us more efficient, more effective. And when we're doing more with less, the ability to have the right data so that I can go more to looking at abnormalities and make them more into predictabilities, right? That's where I see us really making a big change in order to handle a lot of the issues we're talking about today.
Okay.
And I agree with Jim. The skills of today's employees versus what they had 20, 30 years ago, it's completely different.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the next topic. So how can we start to advance industrial control solutions within water, wastewater? And let's start, we kind of broke this down into 3 topics when we talked before. Let's talk about the management of data. Hal, we'll start with you on that.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to a little bit what we said with the management of data. We've got so much data today. I think the management of data really starts with truly understanding what data is truly needed to look at, to analyze, and then to do something with. I can send you all the data in the world, and I talked to several of our system integrator friends, and they tell me how much data we can grab. Even we as a company, Graybar, we have tons of data, but I think you can overwhelm yourself with that. I was talking to one system integrator who mentioned to me, and I think, forgive me, I think it was either John or Jim that mentioned about SCADA, right? And they were talking a little bit different about SCADA. They talked about all these pretty graphical representations that you see in SCADA. And he said the operators don't care about that anymore. They know what the level should be of a pump. They just need a number to know where it is and maybe have it turn a color. They no longer need the pretty pictures. It's the people such as me that need the pretty pictures to be able to see it and grab it. They know what a clarifier looks like, right? So the point being is, do we have the right data coming in? What data should we ignore so we do not get overwhelmed with it? And then what's the next step with that data?
There's this idea of knowledge management. And that's really what Hal's talking to. It's not a matter of having data. It's a matter of having the right data at the right place at the right time in front of the right person. And that's an engineered design. You just don't happen into success, I don't think. And control systems, the way they're designed, what the implication to your question is, it changes the way we approach the control system. First of all, it's got to be able to reach the right data. Second of all, it's got to be able to port the right data. It's got to have the right analytical engines. It's got to have the right historians and data, all of these things. And again, this goes back to standardization. How hard do you want to make it on yourself to put all those separate pieces together? How much of a challenge do you want to have to glue together? I equate it to buying a car, right? When I was a kid, there were no microchips on cars. There were no computers on cars. I could very easily, and I did. I would drop the transmission or I would drop the back end out of my car and replace it with somebody else. We play around with stuff, right? Oh my gosh, if you try to do that with a modern car, that car, I have a car where the transmission and the engine talk electronically. So the transmission is being told by the engine what it's about to do before it does it mechanically. And the transmission adjusts. If I just change that transmission, it's a dramatic effect on fuel efficiency. It's a dramatic effect on how the car moves. Increasingly, control systems, to answer Hal's bell of what he's talking about, might, how much time, effort, and energy do you want to put around that? Standardization is a way to address it. And I think that changes the way we look at the systems.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, going last on this one, they've covered it pretty well. But like they mentioned, all this data in the world, unless you use it, it's worthless for you. And what I see is, we'll have integrators put it in, system will work, but the end users are not getting trained. So training is definitely a big part of managing data.
Okay, so the data, I think I want to skip over to the thing, and I'm going to come back to remote connectivity in just a minute. But that management of data makes me think on some markets that we work with, there's more data, and it also allows you to communicate with other people, maybe that you can share data with people that maybe you wouldn't normally have been able to before. Like, I can share it because Hal's got an access and you can see it. But I think that brings up a security issue, and that's cybersecurity, right? And people even talk about hacking into cars, to use Jim's story. So let's touch on cybersecurity, because all this data, all this great automation, and it's fantastic. But we all know the headaches and the concerns, and we hear stories. You guys probably hear them every day about people getting hacked. Let's touch on cybersecurity and how we need to think about that when talking about advancing our industrial control solutions. Let's start with John, since I made you go last time.
So this actually should be a subject on its own.
Right.
I mean, even the definition of cybersecurity means something different for every person. So the big thing with cybersecurity is there is no one complete system. This is going to take the manufacturer, distributor, system integrator, end user to work together to think, what does the end user think cybersecurity is? So this is a global type question. not just a local type stuff. So it takes a lot of people to build or it takes a village to get cybersecurity correct.
Okay. Yeah. Jim, thoughts on this?
Yeah, from a market standpoint, right? I can tell you, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Southern Cal Edison in the last 6 months have both started the process of passing through significant addendums and riders in the terms and conditions around cybersecurity.
Mm.
They're taking a very legalistic approach. Thou shalt, they're trying to drive compliance. And the bottom line is the market's not ready for that. We're figuring this out, right? We're on a journey right now around cybersecurity from a policy level. This morning, the Department of Homeland Security released a statement on President Biden's or the federal's national cybersecurity program, where they're and I haven't fully digested it yet. It just got published like 15 minutes before this call started. I was trying to read it before I jumped on. But the government continues to get more involved in this arena, and most water and wastewater facilities in the United States are considered critical infrastructure. It's going to be regulated, and it's going to be important. If nothing else from a government compliance standpoint, although I think that people, as people understand this, they're going to realize it's a good governance thing. They're going to want to do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. So John hit the nail on the head. It's a separate topic, but it's fundamental to this because all of this goodness that we talk about that comes from what we can do with automation systems, there is a thought process that says, well, I just won't implement it. I'll put my head in the sand and I won't implement that. I don't know that moving forward, I think you've got a dynamic tension between the need to be secure and the need to have the capabilities that system gives you. And I don't think it's going to be something in the long term you're going to ignore. You might ignore it for a while. I understand that it is a business choice, but in the long term, you're going to have to deal with cybersecurity. And the sooner you get your arms around it and understand it and start designing it from the beginning into your system, and as you go through obsolescence, understanding that your obsolescence plan, the cybersecurity, building that cybersecurity in is core to the decisions you make in obsolescence. I think the happier you are, the more future-proof you'll be.
So I get it. The guy whose username is admin and the password is password gets to go last on this subject matter here. I think John hit the nail on the head in regard to the village mentality. I think this is one subject matter that many of our municipalities, our system integrators, this is a community conversation, right? Of how to approach it. Because to your point, Jim, it is a multi-layer approach. Not one way is going to be perfect for everybody or even perfect for that person that's implementing this. I think the biggest thing is, though, the conversation needs to be had. Hey, what are we looking at today? What are some of the methodologies you're using? How are we trying to keep people inside the fence, so to speak, right? We talk a lot about remote connectivity, and man, how great that would be for a lot of our people to instead of having to get up at 2 a.m. in the morning and drive in and go take a look at it, to be able to remote connect in. But there's so many inherent risks of that if we're not prepared for that piece, we're really putting our people at risk, right? Whatever town, community we're serving, that's a big risk that we're putting them at. So I think this gets more to the Google model where everybody contributes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gets their information in. Hey, here's a couple approaches, and to Jim's points of multi-layer approach, and this is evolving each and every day, because as we get better at cybersecurity, people get better at hacking into systems and getting through that security. So this is the hot topic that if you go to any association, whether it be CSIA or whatever AWWA or whatever water association you may be associated with, this is always a topic, and I think it's going to continue to be a topic for years to come.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next subject. And I do want to remind everyone that there is the Q&A box. You should have a button somewhere on your screen, depending on the software you're using to watch this. Use that to ask any questions you want here, and we'll get to them as we can. And if you don't have a Q&A box for whatever reason, remember you can just put it in the chat, but we'll be reviewing the Q&A box first. All right, so we have two more topics that we wanted to talk about. And the second to last one is what's the future of automation within this, within water, wastewater? Where's it going? What do people be thinking about? What are you all seeing? And we have kind of three topics under this, and let's start with sustainability and how how that's going to impact the system that you're designing for the next whatever number of years. And Jim, let's start with you on that. You live in a state that's pretty important. So
Yeah. I kind of alluded to it earlier. We have one major electrical manufacturer that thinks that the world is going to spend as much on electrical infrastructure in the next 20 years as it did in the first 100. Think about that for a minute. That just tells you how much more energy we're going to consume, how much more energy we need to produce, and how much more critical. At the same time, I think we all recognize that energy may not be the finite or the infinite resource we've thought it was in the past. So there are public policy decisions being driven out of that. And how are we going to address them? I don't know that spending 10 extra cents on structural steel and concrete does a heck of a lot for you from a sustainability standpoint. But investing that money into a system that helps you make better real-time decisions, gives you the right data at the right time to the right people to make a better real-time decision in order to reduce your demand, that's powerful. And that's what the automation systems, that is the hope, one of the hopes and promises of the automation system. I think that's one thing. I think from a sustainability standpoint, I think that's the major thing. I think the second thing that I don't know if this is exactly sustainability, but I think the other key factor, I lost my train of thought. Sustainability, that's a sustainability piece. I've got another thing. We'll get to it when we get to the next question.
Okay.
But Jim, let me ask you a question about that sustainability. We talk about that so much, and I agree. We've got to be good stewards of our resources, and we've got to have plans of how we're going to go about this, whether it's a combination of coal, gas, solar, wind power, whatever. My question is just kind of something to think about for the group as well. A plant manager, a technician, an instrumentation guy. Yeah. I'm not sure sustainability is on the top of their when they wake up in the morning mentality, right? I think that's going to be more toward what's happening, and I'll paraphrase downtown. What is that the city manager? What is the city thinking, or the owner of that municipality, whether it's county, city, whatever? What are they thinking? What are their plans? What is it that they want to accomplish in the next, to your point, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, where the energy productivity is going to jump immensely? And then how does that trickle down to the gentleman or the lady that's in the field holding an instrumentation or doing the instrumentation work, or the facility manager, or even the system integrator, right? Where is their responsibility and sustainability versus just keeping the water flowing? That's the curiosity that I'm trying to figure or work through myself.
We start the conversation around what does the future look like, right? And this is a futures conversation. You're right. Policy will eventually drive all the people you talk about. That's where the metal meets the meat. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where it really happens. What pressure are they feeling today on that? I'll tell you that it varies, even in California. It seems to be the larger the organization and the more people they service, the more topical this is. I have several very small municipalities, small areas, remote areas within California. Nobody talks about this. If you walk in and you talk to the plant manager for the wastewater plant at water reclamation plant for Los Angeles, at Carson, first thing in his month, the first conversation you're going to have, he's not going to talk about instrumentation control or anything. He's going to talk about the fact that we've had record rainfall in California, and most of that water went to the sea. We didn't capture it. even though we have the infrastructure to capture more of it. And he's turning to he's having a conversation with his team going, guys, we've got what we got. We have to run our operation on what we have today. This is what we got. How do we capture 5% more of that water? And when you get right down to it, it's, did we really do all the smartest decisions as that water was flowing through our system to capture the most of it? Did we know in real time how much water was really passing through? Or did we at the end of the shift, somebody got the totalizer and did some math on a spreadsheet to figure it out? And that answer is not as sophisticated as you would hope it would be. So that's real to the instrumentation techs right now are scrambling around trying to figure out when we have massive runoff, how do I get this flow data, and what do I do differently at this plant in order to divert that water someplace so that we can recharge it and recover it? That is a real thing that's going on in a real conversation I've had in the last week. You may not have that problem. I'm reliably informed that John lives in a place where they have lots of water. I don't. In fact, it's very dependent on where you're at.
So I just want to circle back to data.
Yep.
So historically, what I've seen on data is they would have an employee with a book and go look at the meters, the chemicals, and write the stuff down in a book, shut the book, put it away on the table. No one looks at that data. So what we're able to do with the smart meters and stuff is get real-time data and be able to use that information. So just thinking of pumps, if you monitor a pump and you're going to see that the efficiency is actually going down on a pump, you can be proactive. Hey, this pump, the bearings or something else is going bad, the seals. You can be proactive and be able to fix that pump before something happens. So just wanted to circle back to data real quick.
To John and Hal's point, here's another real life example that we have a water district in California that did a science project, literally brought a PhD in to work on pump efficiencies. He came up with a system that required lookup tables, cloud and all this, but it drove out a lot of efficiency in their pumping system. However, technology marches on. The equipment that it was built on went obsolete, needed to be replaced. It was non-standard. It was literally a lab project. Again, standardization, the data, having the right data at the right time and place. John's whole point about if you want to do pump efficiencies, you got to use the data in the now. There's an example of what John and Hal were talking about.
Right. Great. As we move forward, I hear a lot about smart cities. How is that going to impact decisions in this area with the people that you work with and that you see, or are they bringing it up? And again, I think you're right. This is probably something that a technician's probably not thinking about possibly as much as I like what you said downtown.
It's funny when you investigate smart cities and you look and try to research them, there's not as many as you may think that are out there. And it starts bringing up questions of why. Excuse me. And as I started talking with some of our different end users and system integrators, there is the thought of when you're looking at smart cities, you've got another avenue for cybersecurity issues, right? Because you've got data flowing in, data flowing out. But I think where the smart cities piece comes into play, obviously, is you're getting more data. John mentioned a couple of times about, or maybe it was Jim that mentioned about, I know what I'm pumping out, but I don't know what's being consumed, right? And I think that's where the future smart cities is going in regard to what information is going to come into, so that now cities can plan processes, they can plan upgrades, they can see where their money needs to be spent more efficiently and more effectively, because this is all going to tie back into sustainability. This is all going to tie back into the microgrid, right? Because of the amount of power that's going to be deemed needed that we can't produce today. So to me, the smart cities is going to be an interesting thing moving forward. And it's going to be interesting from my perspective because of the connection with the cybersecurity. Because when you're looking at smart cities and you're increasing this over a larger footprint, there's a lot more point of entries for problems and or cybersecurity attacks.
And I think what Hal said there is great. Right now, I think in our journey towards smart cities, we're really addressing specific issues. It's like, what's your point of entry to have a conversation with the city around smart city? You know, Los Angeles is famous for how great its traffic is. You know, how light and easy it is to drive around in the middle of the day. We never get stuck in traffic in California, right? The reality is it's a major problem. And one of the entry points for smart cities has been, how do we just have the right data at the right time to automate how traffic lights work so that we're not wasting time with people sitting in a light when there's no crossing traffic, but we got the other lanes are stacked up, right? Stuff like that is predicting that, knowing what that looks like. I saw a model, I've not seen it implemented, where someone had come up with an intelligent system that basically predicted when and where traffic accidents will occur in a city, right? And they're using John's method. You know, people are sitting there recording stuff, but if you link that to dynamic live data, then it's like, well, the opportunity for an accident at this intersection just went up by this amount. Those are things that I'm seeing conversations in on the smart city front. I have one plant who's trying to implement a smart cities approach at a wastewater treatment plant here in Southern California. They've contracted for it and they've gone about it. Mostly they did it around the idea of cost savings, in driving out cost savings in operations is really what it came down to, which was a lot of doing more with less, and staging the pumps. But that's what smart cities meant to them. So, you know, it's developing. It's not going away. I think we're still discovering what we can do with it.
And for me, I see smart city. We're talking water in this podcast, but a smart city saying you get extra rain, you get a pipe breaking. We got to talk to the traffic guys. We have to talk to the electrical grid. We have to talk to manufacturing. So a smart city, like, I consider it like a living organism. It takes many parts to get it to work. So,
yeah. Well, the traffic light thing is something I can completely relate to, and I wonder why can't we manage that yet? So anyway, we can go down that road. But all right, we're kind of running up against time here, and I do want to mention that we've had a few questions. So we have a good mix of internal Graybar people watching, and you know, some of our customers and manufacturer friends on this. But a lot of our questions are kind of focused internal type of questions. So what I think I'm going to do with those, if I save those, and we'll send those out to our team here, and we can answer those internally via email and stuff. But again, please, any questions, please keep putting them in there, and we'll get to them as appropriate. So I want to wrap up with, you know, the question of, you know, why spend the money? Because if I understand everything, you know, first of all, you have to expend just to update your infrastructure. So, but why spend the extra time and energy to even think about, you know, automation controls? And all the things you guys have brought up adds a lot of complexities to the decision cycle. And Jim, you kind of shared a story with us about how a municipality or facility kind of holistically tackled the problem. And when I kind of talk about part two, you know, that holistic approach is something that we're going to focus a lot on in the next conversation. But maybe you can get let's have story time with Jim and kind of hear about this. And
Again, so I apologize.
We're all going to get on our mats and take a nap. All right, go ahead, Jim.
Exactly. So we had a utility here in Southern California who had an engineer who took a different approach. He kept looking over at the IT guys and saying, how are you getting all this money on a regular basis to refresh the IT system? But over here on the automation side, I'm fighting for every dime and I'm underfunded. That's where this conversation started. And what he realized was that IT had approached what they do as a holistic system, tying together security and data reliability and all this other stuff. So they go to the CEO and they go, here's the budget to make sure you get your email and your billings and all this other stuff. And there it is. On the automation world, we tend to break it down into a bunch of little projects. So it looks like a bunch of little islands of automation. I need money in order to automate this pump station. I need money in order to get data from this well. And what they had not done is aggregated all the money that had been spent on the automation system and presented it to leadership management within the utility and saying, here's how much you've spent on all this. Well, it turns out when they did the math, they figured out they had nearly a $2.5 to $3 million asset called the automation system. It wasn't 70 or 80 pump stations. It was one automation system. It was this amount of money. And by gosh, we need to manage that the same way you would manage any other large company asset. And by doing that, they ended up changing the way they funded and looked at automation. Rather than looking at a whole bunch of little islands and the features and benefits of that station or that application or that bioreactor or whatever it was, they looked at it instead of, no, this is its own thing. As John said with smart cities, it's its own organic, holistic organism. And that's how they started looking at their automation system. And when they did that, they realized we have to invest the money to keep updating that. So the environment changed. Not only did they have the money to get ahead of obsolescence, so they didn't feel like they were always having to go to eBay to, my God, that thing went obsolete 12 months ago. The only way I can find the part is on eBay, or those tough situations. They actually had a budget that they could manage the health and welfare, and that gave them the ability to look forward about where they wanted to go. And now they're trying to upgrade on purpose to increase the capabilities to talk about all these things that Hal and John and I have been talking about.
Hal, any thoughts or questions arise from that, or the thought about why spend the money?
When I see the thought of why spend the money, it's kind of that old adage. First, we've got to just keep up, right? Because if I sit here in some of what John was speaking of 50 years, the amount of money it's going to take me to move from 1970, I guess that'd be 70 something, right? To today is a huge amount. But if I continue to evolve with the technology, if I continue to evolve with the standardizations and keep up, the stress on my infrastructure is going to be less. The stress on my people is going to be less, and the ability to expand and adapt to whatever is next, right? Who'd have thought we would have had to expand and adapt to COVID, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm keeping up, then I think the stress on the monetary investment, the stress on the people, and other things disappears. I liken it off to, I don't want to fall off a 100-foot cliff. I'm going to die. If I have to go from 1970 to 2023, I'm going to die. If I fall off a 10-foot cliff, guys, I'm going to get hurt, but I'm going to recover. And if I'm doing more and trying to keep up, it's going to be a smaller cliff every time when something out of the blue comes up.
Yeah. John, final thoughts on that?
So just a summary, why to spend money. We want to promote a healthy economic growth, and we want to improve our quality of life. So when I turn on a faucet, I want to know the water is clean and I have enough pressure.
Yeah, great. Nice and simple. I like that answer. Because yeah, it does come down to that, but it's interesting as I learn more about this market, how complex it is to make that seemingly simple thing happen. So any final thoughts from you all as we close out, Jim or Hal or John? No,
I appreciate the audience.
Yeah, so, yeah, this has been great, and I do appreciate all of those who have joined us and who will join us and watch the recording. Yeah, so we are recording this. We will be sending out a link either tomorrow or Monday, so that you can, if you had to miss it, I know some people arrive late, you can watch it or share it with your peers. So I'm currently working on part 2 of our discussion, and it's really meant to move us forward and thinking about some of these topics and more. And really, it's going to feature, from the perspective of industry leadership, integrators, and manufacturers. So it's going to be all outside of Graybar people besides myself. And again, we're going to touch on some of the topics we've touched on already: sustainability, future proofing. Now, but then we're going to spend a little bit more time maybe implementing holistic solutions and what that looks like, and then really what makes a job a success. I mean, I think John rightly summed it up pretty easily. I'll even sum it up more. Do I want to drink the water in your system, right? Even though we have multiple uses for water, but that's a common one. But what else makes it a success from the eyes of all the different parties? So what's cool is we're going to have the three perspectives we're going to have is Steve Marsh, a manager from Schneider Electric, is going to be on with us. So he's going to provide that perspective. Brian Porsche from Prime Controls. So from the integrator perspective, that's going to be interesting to hear his. And then finally, Jose Rivera, the CEO of CSIA, which Hal, you brought up earlier. So that'll be cool to get kind of from a broad industry perspective, some of these topics and what they're seeing and, how they're solving it. And hopefully that'll be beneficial to our, the people we work with out there who are watching. So again, thank you so much, the three of you, for all the time that you've put into planning this and working with us to get this live. For all those who watched with us and your questions, and as I said, the internal ones, we'll get to that. I'll send it out to this group, and we'll just kind of have a conversation via email about some of those questions you've brought up. And to all those who's joined us, thank you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.